She said she just wanted to help. That's what my sister-in-law told me when she suggested I move into her spare room while my husband was away on his northern contract. She said it with this soft smile, her hand on my arm, her voice low like she was doing me a favor, and I believed her. I was 7 months postpartum, exhausted in a way I didn't have words for yet, and my husband was going to be 3,000 kilometers away in Fort McMurray for at least 4 months. I believed her because I needed to. My son was 9 months old. He had his father's ears and my grandmother's dark eyes, and he weighed exactly as much as a small bag of flour when I held him against my chest. His name was Felix, and he was the reason I said yes. My husband, I'll call him my husband because this story is about what his family did, not about him, had been offered a camp rotation job through his company. Fly in, fly out, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, but the first rotation was going to run longer because of a project delay. 4 months, maybe 5. The money was significant. We had a mortgage on a small semi in Barrie, Ontario, a baby, and a line of credit that made me nervous every time I looked at it. We needed the money. He took the job. His sister, I will call her my sister-in-law, and I want you to hold on to who she is through this entire story, offered the room 2 days before he left. She said my place was too far from her mother, who had recently had hip surgery and needed people around. She said it would be good for me not to be alone with an infant. She said the house was big and her kids were older now and Felix would love having cousins nearby. She had a house in Innisfil, 40 minutes from mine. It wasn't far. I said I'd think about it. My husband thought it was a great idea. He said his sister had always been generous, that her husband was easygoing, that I'd have company. He looked relieved when he said it. That should have told me something. I said yes the day before he flew out. His sister came to help me pack a few bags. Just the essentials, she said. Just what I'd need for a few weeks. I assumed I'd be going home regularly to check on the house, get more things, stay connected to my own life. I packed Felix's things, my clothes, my laptop, the baby monitor. I left my car in my driveway. That was my first mistake. I did not know then that it would not be the last one I made inside that house. The first week was fine. Her husband was quiet and kept to himself. Her kids, a boy of 15 and a girl of 12, ignored us mostly. My sister-in-law made dinner every night, and we ate together, and she asked about Felix and seemed genuinely interested, and I thought, okay, this is going to be okay. The second week, things shifted. It started with small things, the kind of things that, when you're sleep-deprived and in someone else's house and 3,000 kilometers from your husband, you convince yourself you're imagining. She asked if she could borrow my car to run some errands because hers was making a noise, I said. Of course, she didn't bring it back until late that night. The next day, she mentioned that her husband's schedule had changed and she needed to drive him to work twice a week, and could she keep using mine for now? I said I supposed so, since I wasn't going anywhere with a baby in the cold anyway. She said she'd cover gas. She never did. Then my phone started acting strange. I lost signal in the house constantly. I assumed it was the building, old construction, thick walls. I switched to the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi was slow and kept dropping. I mentioned it to her and she said she'd call her provider. She never did. I was trying to call my husband every 2 days. The calls kept cutting out. I'd get a few minutes of choppy connection and then nothing. He'd text me when he could, but he was on a remote site and reception was inconsistent. His sister called him, though. She called him from her own phone with her good signal and her reliable connection, and she told him everything was wonderful. She told him Felix was thriving. She told him I seemed happy and rested. She told him her mother loved having the baby around. I did not know this then. I found out later. I want you to keep that in mind. His mother, my mother-in-law who had had the hip surgery, who was supposedly the reason I was there, lived 20 minutes away. I didn't meet her until the end of the second week. She came for Sunday dinner, and the way she looked at me across the table made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not angry, just assessing, like I was a problem she was in the process of solving. After dinner, she held Felix. She held him for almost 2 hours, and she didn't give him back until he started crying for me. And while she held him, she talked to her daughter about family things, about people I didn't know, in that particular way people have when they want you to feel like a guest in a room you thought you lived in. I went upstairs with Felix, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room, and I thought, I need to go home. But my car was gone. My sister-in-law had it. She said she'd be back by 9. She came back at 11. By then, Felix was asleep, and the thought of loading him into a car seat in the dark, driving home to a cold house, trying to settle him all over again. I stayed. I kept staying. By the 3rd week, she started mentioning money. My husband's direct deposit went to our joint account. I had a debit card. My sister-in-law suggested casually at breakfast that I might want to contribute to groceries since I was eating their food and Felix was using their hot water and electricity. I said that was fair, and I'd transfer her something at the end of the week. She said, actually, cash would be easier, and gave me a number. It was $200 a week. I said that seemed high for one person and a baby. She said formula was expensive for her to keep stocked. I said I was still nursing, mostly. She said, well, the utilities weren't free. I paid it. The week after that, it went up to $250. She said her hydro bill had come in higher than expected. I transferred money from our account to get cash. That was when I noticed the account balance was lower than it should have been. Not dramatically. Not the kind of number that makes you call the bank immediately. Just lower, like a slow leak. I tried to log into our online banking to look at the transaction history. I couldn't get in. My password wasn't working. I assumed I'd misremembered it and tried to reset it. The reset email went to an address I didn't recognize. I sat with my phone in the spare room and I felt something cold move through me. Slow, like cold water. I called the bank from the landline, my sister-in-law's landline, in the kitchen where she could hear me. The automated system told me my account information had been updated recently. It transferred me to a representative. The representative asked me security questions. I answered them. She told me the mailing address on the account had been changed. The email address had been changed. A secondary contact had been added. I asked who the secondary contact was. She couldn't tell me over the phone. She asked if I wanted to come into a branch. I said yes. I said I'd be there tomorrow. My sister-in-law asked me that evening if I needed anything from town. I said no. I didn't mention the bank. I lay awake that night with Felix breathing beside me, and I went through every scenario I could think of, and all of them scared me. In the morning, I asked to borrow my own car. My sister-in-law said her husband had it. I said, could I take hers then? She said it was still making that noise and wasn't safe. I said I'd call a cab. She said the nearest cab company was unreliable and expensive, and what did I need in town anyway? Maybe she could help. I said I needed to go to the bank. She said she could drive me after lunch. She drove me after lunch. She sat in the car while I went in. The bank representative was a woman with a careful voice who pulled up our account and told me, quietly, that 2 weeks ago a document had been submitted authorizing a third party to have view access to the account. The document had my husband's name on it and what appeared to be both our signatures. The third party was my mother-in-law. I stared at her. I asked to see the document. She showed me a scanned copy. My signature was not mine. I knew my own signature. I had signed it 1,000 times on school forms and work contracts and our mortgage. That was not my signature. I kept my voice very even. I thanked her. I asked what I needed to do. She said I should just dispute the authorization and have it removed. But there was a process, and she could initiate it if I wanted. I said yes. She started the paperwork. She asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I was not fine. I got back in the car. My sister-in-law asked how it went. I said they just needed to verify some information. She nodded and pulled out of the parking lot. I watched her face in the reflection of the window. She was not worried. She was not curious. She had the look of someone who already knew the answer to a question they hadn't asked. That night, I went through my bag very carefully. I found a folder I didn't remember packing, a thin beige folder with some papers in it. I had assumed it was Felix's vaccination records. I opened it. It was a document I had never seen before, a financial management authorization form. It had both my name and my husband's name on it. It listed my mother-in-law as the authorized manager of household accounts during my husband's absence. My signature at the bottom was not mine. I sat very still for a long time. Then I put the folder back exactly where I had found it, and I went and nursed Felix until he fell asleep, and I thought about every single step I needed to take. I did not have my car. I did not have reliable phone access. I had limited cash. My husband was calling his sister for updates. No one knew what was actually happening to me, but I was not without options. I had a brain, and I was very, very angry, and sometimes that is enough. Over the next 3 days, I was careful, I was friendly. I asked my sister-in-law to take me to the pharmacy for diapers, and I used that trip to buy a cheap prepaid phone from the rack near the door, paid for it in cash, and said nothing about it. I set it up that night after everyone was asleep. I downloaded the banking app on it and logged in using the information I'd had restored at the branch. What I saw made my chest tight in a way that hadn't happened since my hardest day of labor. Over the past 6 weeks, transfers had been made out of the account, small ones at first, $50 here, $80 there, then larger ones. There were grocery charges from stores I hadn't been to, gas charges from a station 40 minutes from Innisfil's, an insurance payment that was not for any policy I recognized. The total was close to $4,000. I took screenshots of everything. Then I called my brother. I want to tell you about my brother. He is 3 years older than me, and he works in commercial property law in Toronto. He is not flashy about it. He drives a sensible car, and he wears the same kind of sweater on weekends that he's worn since university, but he knows exactly what to do when someone has committed fraud against his little sister. I called him at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and I told him everything, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Don't go back to the bank. Don't tip them off. Send me everything you have." I sent him the screenshots. He called me back in the morning. He had already spoken to a colleague who did family and financial law. He had already looked at the document type I described. He told me that what had been done, forging signatures on a financial authorization, accessing an account without consent, was fraud. It was criminal fraud. He asked how soon I could leave the house. I said I needed my car back first. I said I needed a plan. He said, "I'll come get you." I said I didn't want to spook them. I said I wanted to do this right. He said, "You have 24 hours to be out of that house before I drive up there myself." He gave me 24 hours because I asked him to. I used them. The next afternoon, I told my sister-in-law as I was going to take Felix for a walk. She handed me the stroller without a second thought. I walked to the end of the street. My brother was parked there in his gray Civic, engine running, heat on. I put Felix in the car seat in the back. I got in the front. I did not bring anything except the prepaid phone, my wallet, my nursing pillow, and Felix's bag. I left everything else in the spare room, my clothes, my laptop, my chargers. I didn't want her to notice anything was missing. My brother drove us to his place in Toronto. He didn't say much on the drive. He had the news on low. Felix fell asleep before we hit the highway. My brother passed me a coffee from the cup holder without a word, and I drank it and looked at the 400 going south, and I started to cry quietly because I had not cried yet. I had been too busy trying to survive to cry. That night, I stayed in his guest room, and the next morning he sat with me at his kitchen table, and we went through everything together. He had already contacted the police. A fraud report had been filed. His colleague had been retained. The bank had been notified officially, and the authorization document had been flagged. A forensic review of the signatures had been requested. I called my husband that morning. This time I used my brother's phone, which had clear signal and no interference. He answered on the second ring. I could hear the noise of the work camp behind him. I told him everything. There was a very long silence. Then I heard him make a sound I had never heard from him before, a kind of controlled exhale, very slow, the way people breathe when they are keeping themselves from saying something they can't take back. He asked me if Felix was safe. I said yes. He asked if I was safe. I said yes. He said, "I'm going to call my site supervisor." He was on emergency leave within 48 hours. In the meantime, my brother's colleague was doing what lawyers do when someone has committed fraud against a client. The authorization document had been prepared using a template found later on my mother-in-law's home computer. The signatures had been traced. Mine had been copied from a document I had signed when I first moved in, something I had assumed was a household agreement, something I had signed without reading carefully enough because I was holding a 9-month-old and I trusted the people handing it to me. My sister-in-law had known. The document was found in her email sent to her 2 weeks before I arrived. She had helped plan this before I even moved in. The investigation took several weeks. It was not fast or clean or satisfying in the moment. It was forms and phone calls and a meeting with a Crown prosecutor that lasted 2.5 hours and made me feel scraped out and hollow. My husband sat beside me through all of it and held my hand and said nothing useful but was exactly present in the way that mattered. My mother-in-law was charged with fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada. My sister-in-law was charged as a co-conspirator. The total amount that had been moved or authorized to be moved from our account, including the transfers I'd documented and amounts that had been queued for future authorization, was just over $11,000. They did not get away with it. At sentencing, my mother-in-law received 14 months in federal supervision with a condition of no contact with us and a repayment order for the full amount plus interest. My sister-in-law received an 8-month conditional sentence and a permanent fraud conviction on her record. Neither of them apologized. My mother-in-law said something to her lawyer about family disagreements and property management that made the judge look at her the way you look at something you found in a place it should not be. My car had been used, I found this out later, to transport paperwork between my mother-in-law's house and a notary office in Barrie, where someone, it was never confirmed who, had gone with documents and a signature that was not mine. The notary had not verified identity adequately. That was a separate complaint. My husband's company extended his rotation and gave him a hardship allowance once they understood what had happened. The extra income, combined with the repayment order, allowed us to pay off the line of credit that had been keeping me up at night since before Felix was born. It is strange what betrayal does to the way you see time. I look back at those weeks in that spare room, the way I sat on the edge of the bed at night with Felix asleep and the sound of the house settling around me, and I think about how long I told myself I was imagining things. How long I stayed because leaving felt complicated, how long I gave people the benefit of the doubt they had never extended to me. What I know now that I did not know then. I was not powerless. I had a brain and a brother and a bank branch that one clear afternoon. That was enough. It turned out it was exactly enough. Felix is 17 months old now. He has 4 teeth, and he walks with this hilarious, determined stomp that makes everyone he passes look twice. He doesn't know any of this story yet. Someday, when he's older, I'll think about what to tell him. I think I'll tell him that when someone says they just want to help, it's okay to ask what they mean by that. It's okay to read the paperwork. It's okay to take your time. And if someone is using your car and changing your passwords and forging your name on documents in the province of Ontario, call your brother.